So at the Apple event day, I uploaded one video about the iPad Air 2020 and I talked like the iPad Air 2020 is now the new Pro. iPad Pro 2020 is not anymore the Pro. The iPad Air 2020 is going to be the Pro because it has 5nm processors and all the fancy stuffs. But no, that's not the case. It's very different. After doing further researches, I found that the iPad Pro 2020 is still a Pro. So why should you buy the iPad Pro 2020 instead of the iPad Air 2020? Yep, some people may think that it's inexpensive and it has 5nm processors, it has much more transistors, but my friend, you are in a wrong path like me. I was, but right now I have noted all the 5 things. Those are much better on the iPad Pro. You can do much better things with the iPad Pro. Okay, I have noted down 5 major things. Those are still better on the iPad Pro 2020. Even the iPad Pro 2020 is $799. It owed the price. Okay, the first thing is processors. So you may say, EM, what's about the processor? The processor on the iPad Air is 5nm. On the other hand, the iPad Pro 2020 has 7nm. So technically that 5nm one should be better. Okay, but my friend, you're wrong. Still you're wrong. So the processor on the iPad Air 2020 is 6-core CPU, 4-core GPU. On the other hand, on the iPad Pro 2020, that has A12Z processor, and A12Z is a desktop class processor that has 8-core CPU and 8-core GPU. So in terms of the processor on the iPad Pro 2020 is still much better than the iPad Air 2020. You will get much better performance on the iPad Pro 2020 because of those 2 more extra cores on the CPU and 4 more extra cores on the GPU side. So for video editing, photo editing, graphics designing, things like that, the iPad Pro 2020 still shines more than the iPad Air 2020. It's the real deal. Like, I got a little excited, like that's 5nm, that's amazing, but there are something else also needed to consider, that is the core on the CPU and also on the GPU. I hope you got the thing. Okay, the next one is 120Hz laminated display. Yes, I know that the iPad Air 2020 has laminated display, but the iPad Pro 2020 has 120Hz. So 120Hz is much better while you are watching movie. If that movie is 24 frames per second, the display frame rate of that iPad Pro 2020 also will be 24, and that's how you can enjoy the content much better. The battery life will be much better. On the other hand, on the iPad Air 2020, whether you are watching movie, you are playing games, the display frame rate will be constant 60 frames per second. That means the battery life will not be as good as the iPad Pro 2020. And 120Hz has like an extra feel. If you are an artist, you want to use the Apple Pencil, that 120Hz will still give you much more benefit than that 60Hz display. Okay, the next one is the camera. iPad Pro 2020 has ultra wide angle camera, a LIDAR sensor, and it has flashlight. On the other hand, on the iPad Air 2020, you don't get that flashlight, you don't get that ultra wide angle lens, you don't get that LIDAR sensor that may help you so much if you do video shooting maybe. The next one is the Face ID. iPad Pro 2020 has Face ID, whereas iPad Air 2020 has Touch ID. Which one is better? In my opinion, the iPad Pro's Face ID is much better because it works on every orientation. It doesn't matter if your iPad is in landscape mode or in portrait mode, it will work in every side, and that's the thing, will help you so much. Okay, the Touch ID is not as intuitive as Face ID on the iPads. Yes, I know that the Face ID on the iPhones are not that great, not super great, but yeah, on the iPad it's amazing. Okay, the next one is studio quality microphone. So the iPad Pro 2020 has a studio quality microphone, and also it has 4 speakers, whereas the iPad Air 2020 has only 2 speakers and it doesn't also have studio quality microphone. Like the microphones, like Apple is working super hard on the microphone section, and that's why the microphones on the iPads are becoming mainstream devices. Those will be amazing devices in futures, and with these extra features like amazing quality speakers on the iPad Pro, amazing quality microphones on the iPad Pro, you may do some voiceovers, who knows. Anyway, the final and the 6th one, this is an extra feature, that is the base variant of iPad Pro has 120 GB storage. On the other hand, the iPad Air 2020 has only 64 GB of storage. So those were the things you have to consider while buying an iPad Pro. Right now, the conclusion is, if you just want to do basic things, you may get those things with the iPad only. But if you want to be a little more, you want to be creative like me, then you can definitely go for the iPad Air. But if you want to go absolute crazy, you want to do every freaking things on your iPad, then you should definitely go to the iPad Pro, because amazing things have their cost. If you haven't understood something or anything, in the description I have written all the things. You can definitely go and read those things from there. Those are very small keynotes. Anyway, that was all for this one. I hope you get the things about the iPad Pro and the iPad Air, and every single confusion about the iPad Pro and the iPad Air is now no more. I'll be really happy to hear your voice out in the comment section. That was all for this one. Stay safe. Goodbye.